Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today is going to be a big one. This is going to be my healer meta predictions for patch 10.2 when it comes to Mythic Plus content, and we're going to be ranking every single healer based on my testing on the PTR servers. Just some extra info about how I went about this. I tested every single healer when it comes to Mythic Plus, doing a Warcraft mana with poke situations, poke groups. This allowed me to have a better understanding of what each healer is capable of in terms of dealing with oh crap moments, in terms of how much damage output you can achieve as every single healing spec, how much healing throughput can you do, what is your utility in terms of providing additional stops, dispels, and things like that. Now, I didn't only test Warcraft mana, but this video is going to showcase footage from my Warcraft mana runs just to show you how each healer felt in terms of testing. And of course, if you like this content, like and subscribe. It takes me ages to test every single healer and to put these videos, edit these videos and things like that. So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And outside of that, I made a bunch of little tier list videos based on my phone, based on the success rate that I had in terms of PTR testing. This video is going to be a little bit different because it's going to be taking meta considerations. And in terms of what healer is going to become meta, you have to consider what are the DPS, what are the tanks that are considered to be strong coming into 10.2, because you don't really want to overlap utilities. Perfect example is Preservation of Evoker right now is doing really well, but Augmentation is looking to be like a sure pick in high-end Mythic Plus content, meaning that you might not want to overlap that utility considering you only have 5 players in the group. On top of that, it seems that in 10.2 that melee is getting an increase in terms of being more viable. For example, Havoc Demon Hunter is looking really strong. For example, at least one of the rogue specs is going to be strong in my opinion, because rogues are getting a rework, which means that you might have a melee heavy comp, which means you'll have more interrupts, or melee interrupts a lot of times will be considered better than range interrupts. Or for example, you might have a prot paladin as the main tank, which means that interrupts are not going to be a big deal, which is a big consideration when you consider something like priests who do not provide an interrupt in the group. But based on all the testing that I did with healers in 10.2 PTR, I can almost tell you that the difference between a lot of the healers is not that big. This is going to be a meta consideration, and we're going to try to squeeze out every single percentage in terms of making healer meta. But at the end of the day, I can definitely tell you, playing the healer that you enjoy the most is going to be the best value for subscription. I don't think you'll have a very restrictive meta that you had at the end of season 2. I don't think you'll have a god comp. I think in season 3 there's going to be a lot more viable specs out there. I think there's going to be a lot more competition in terms of healers, more competition in terms of DPS, and something like tanks, with the exception of something like Augmentation Evoker, because Augmentation Evoker still seems to be like a sure pick when it comes to that Mythic Plus meta, because guess what, there is a support role in World of Warcraft with only one spec that can actually meet that, and Augmentation is going to shape how the meta is going to affect healer balance, tank balance, and DPS balance, and we're going to talk about this. But first of all, let's go and start with our first healer, and that's going to be Holy Paladin. And we're going to start off with Holy Paladin, and I'm not quite sure where to put Holy Paladin right now, because Holy Paladin is season 2 the king of Mythic Plus, because it was the best healer in season 2. It was the healer that you include in the god comp. What is happening to Holy Paladin in 10.2 and based on my testing? So first of all, Holy Paladin still provides a lot of good utility. Holy Paladin generally, ever since the inception in terms of the rework in patch 10.15, has pretty much received nerfs, because Blizzard is very scared about having another season where Holy Paladin is going to be absolutely mandatory, and the nerfs can absolutely be felt. At the end of the day, you still provide a lot of utility in terms of you have a battle res. I think having a battle res is more important than having a bloodlust in this meta, because Augmentation Evoker provides bloodlust. As a Holy Paladin, you still have immunity. Your survivability has been nerfed in terms of Sanctified Plates, but you still have strong survivability with defensives, immunity, and things like that. So I still think you're a sturdy melee healer. You have to consider it is a melee healer, but at the end of the day, Holy Paladin is not really punished that much if they have to step out of melee. So that's a big boon in case you can't be close to the boss or trash back, you have to get away or something. You can still heal, you can still do a lot of things, which is a big difference when you compare it to something like a Mistweaver Monk, who might be running that Phalanx Stomp when it comes to Mythic Plus in 10.2. At the end of the day, when you play Holy Paladin, you most likely will have a cooldown for almost any situation. You can turn your healing cooldowns or cooldowns in general to add additional damage. You can use Daybreak as a reset of Glimmers. There is additional emphasis on Holy Shock because of your 2-set bonus, which can provide damage and healing, which is only a good thing. Your 4-set bonus is going to reduce the cooldown of Daybreak and also give you a bit of haste, which there is a lot of emphasis on how you're going to use things like Divine Toll and Daybreak in terms of healing or damage, or how you spread your glimmers. There has been a lot of nerfs to Holy Paladin throughout 10.2 PTR and things like that, and I think a lot of people are down about Holy Paladin because a lot of people are not sure where it's going to stand up in terms of the meta. There has been losses in terms of your Holy Prism. Without the old tier set, Holy Prism just definitely does not feel as impactful as before. So that might be one less button that you have in your arsenal. And of course, while I was editing the video, Blizzard decided to do some fine-tuning towards healers, and that includes a sizable buff to Holy Prism, which makes a whole lot of sense because they want the button to feel much more impactful than it does right now in 10.2 PTR. Check out the closing or summary of the video for my closing thoughts. Still a healer that provides a good spot healing. You're actually the OG healer, considering in Season 2 that was your main strength. In Season 3 a lot of other healers kind of catching up to some extent, but good spot healing, situationally strong utility with things like Bop and Freedom, which can be very strong depending on which content or dungeon you're doing. At the end of the day, in terms of ranking Holy Paladin, I'm still going to be placing Holy Paladin in S tier because I still feel Holy Paladin provides a lot of spot healing. It still has a lot of utility. Balorus is going to be something that is most likely going to be wanted. There is just a lot of good things about Holy Paladin, even with the nerfs that happen to this class every single week. I think a lot of players are going to be looking at their Holy Paladin and they're like, I just don't like getting nerfed every single week. That's just an indication of how strong Holy Paladin was ever since its rework in patch 10.15. It is a class that almost feels like it was made for Mythic Plus content. And even after all these nerfs, I still think Holy Paladin is going to be S tier or high A tier at the very minimum. I'm going to be placing it in S tier because if you're Holy Paladin who enjoys playing their Paladin in Mythic Plus content, you're still most likely going to be playing it because in an organized group, with the amount of utility you provide, with the damage or healing patterns that you can do in terms of short cooldowns, it's still going to be a very strong healer. And now let's move on to Preservation of Evoker. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on Preservation of Evoker's power, but I think they're kind of waking up right now in terms of the output that you can provide. In terms of DPS and healing, it is very, very strong, and that is partly due to the fact that your 2-set bonus is an absolute powerhouse. Your empowered abilities are going to be shooting out living flames, and that is going to give you a chance of getting essence bursts, and you can spend your essence bursts in multiple different ways. There's a lot of people that were upset about the fact that resonating spheres were getting nerfed in terms of spreading your echoes, and a lot of people were kind of doom and glooming about that fact. But you have to consider the resonating sphere is getting nerfed, but that doesn't really matter that much because you're getting so much essence bursts from your 2-set bonus. You can still spend essence bursts in multiple different ways depending on which build you're running. And I'm saying this because in raids, Preservation of Evoker is playing that Emerald Blossoms build. You're using your essence burst in terms of providing Emerald Blossoms, and it's very strong. In Mythic Plus, I'm not sure what the best build is going to be. A lot of people, or some people, were talking about the fact that maybe they're going to try and find a Mythic Plus build where you try to squeeze in Emerald Blossoms, especially considering that there might be more melee emphasis in that Mythic Plus meta comp. I'm not sure if that's going to be the way to go because I tested multiple different builds and I had really good time. I had a really good time in terms of providing damage, in terms of providing healing, in terms of dealing with different situations. And I still think you have a lot of O-Crap buttons in terms of rewind, in terms of Emerald Communion, in terms of stasis, if you can preemptively prepare your stasis if you know the damage is going to happen. You still have a lot of ways of topping up your group party, and I think your 2-set bonus is hard carrying Preservation of Evoker. But at the end of the day, Preservation of Evoker still has range limitations in terms of 30 yards for a lot of your heals, which can be an issue. But if the comp is going to be more around melee, that issue is going to be less evident. But you have to talk about the biggest if in this room right now, the elephant in the room when it comes to Preservation of Evoker, and that is going to be Augmentation of Evoker. Augmentation of Evoker is still looking to be like an almost sure pick when it comes to that high-end Mythic Plus composition. And because you have Augmentation of Evoker, you might not want to duplicate utilities because you only have 5 people in a group when it comes to Mythic Plus. So because of this, I'm going to be placing Preservation of Evoker. In my eyes, if Augmentation was not a thing, Preservation would be S tier. I think people are sleeping on the output of Preservation. And at the end of the day, you still have good utility with things like Bloodlust, you have Knock Up, you have Pushback, you have Cauterizing Flame, which can dispel anything, which can be very strong depending on the situation you're doing. You have Poison Dispel, which can be strong in certain dungeons as well in Season 3. So there's a lot of utility that Preservation of Evoker can provide. There's a lot of output that Preservation of Evoker can do, and there's possibly multiple builds that you can make use of. Again, it's kind of like a wild west for Preservation of Evoker when it comes to Mythic Plus builds, because people are coming up with a lot of different variations. But overall, Evoker is really strong, but Augmentation exists, and therefore I'm going to be placing Preservation in A tier, because purely for the fact that Augmentation is looking to be like such a sure pick when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus, which honestly feels a little bit sad. But if you're looking to play Preservation, if you like Preservation of Evoker, you should still play this class because your numbers are still going to be looking really good, and you can definitely carry your group. if shit hits the fan. Now let's move on to Restoration Druid, and again, I think it's one of those classes that people are kind of sleeping on in terms of the Mythicalist meta, in terms of what you can provide, in terms of how much carry potential you have, because I've been testing a lot of Resto Druid when it comes to Season 3, when it comes to Mythicalist content, and I've tried out multiple different Mythicalist builds, and I came across a build where you can use or make use of things like Tree of Life. If you're running Tree of Life, you're also running Scenarios Guidance, which means that you're going to be proccing Grove Guardians. Those Grove Guardians are going to be proccing your 2-set bonus. On top of that, you have to remember that if you're maintaining Life Bloom and things like that, you're going to be getting Clear Casting, and if you use Clear Casting, you're also going to be casting Nourish because of your 4-set bonus, and that is also going to proc your 2-set. So, during moments, I genuinely can tell you this, that there are moments in Mythicalist content where I felt that no other healer could carry through the damage, or someone messed up, someone overpulled. And with Resto Druid, if I have Tree of Life, if I have Grove Guardians, I'm using my heals, I'm proccing my tier set, everything kind of combines to create a powerhouse, a HPS powerhouse of a healer that I feel like you can do pulls that no other healer can do. And this is why I just cannot ignore the strength of Resto Druid. In terms of pure HPS, in terms of the carry potential, I even tried out builds with Reforestation. I ran a couple of Mythicalist dungeons with Restoration Druid where majority of my healing was not my healing. It was all coming from Grove Guardians because of the interaction in terms of spawning Grove Guardians, in terms of proccing your 2-set bonus and things like that. I'm not quite sure what the best DPS build is going to be for Restoration Druid, because there's been quite a few changes in terms of buffing Wrath, in terms of buffing Starfire and things like that. There's been reintroduction of talents like Liveliness, which is a far more fun option than something like Circle Life and Death, because Liveliness does not reduce the duration of your dots and hunts. There might be more emphasis on talents like Heart of the Wild, which means that every 5 minutes you'll be able to do a lot more damage, which can be awkward to fit in because it kind of requires you to know if there's going to be damage happening, can I focus full DPS and things like that. So there is a couple of things or unknowns about the damage of Resto Druid, but it can also be said that because Resto Druid has so much HPS, depending on which build you're running, is that Resto Druid might be a prime candidate for, let's say for example, a DPS trinket emerges that is really good. Resto Druid could easily lose some HPS in order to gain more damage because they just have so much healing right now. It just feels like every time you approach a trash pack or a boss fight, you might have something available to help you with healing. For example, you might have multiple charges of Grove Guardians because Grove Guardians last for 15 seconds and the recharge rate is 20 seconds. You might have Tree of Life available. You might be running Reforestation. I'm not sure if Reforestation is going to be a thing, but based on my testing, you might, for example, you have 2 stacks of Reforestation and your next Swiftman is going to proc Tree of Life, which also is going to proc Grove Guardians, which also is going to work with your 2-set bonus. You might be running Flourish. Flourish has been nerfed, but the cooldown of Flourish is now 1 minute. But keep in mind, I'm not saying this is going to be the best build. This is something that I was testing, and things like Flourish, I still feel, even though that the nerf was pretty big, the fact that it's 1 minute, I don't think it's a bad 1 minute cooldown, but we'll see if there's going to be more builds emerging in terms of different playstyles. It feels like you could have something available almost every time you approach a trash pack or a boss fight, depending on how you use your Grove Guardians and things like that. If shit hits the fan, you might use Grove Guardians, all charges of Grove Guardians instantly, and you will be doing so much healing. For example, there is multiple cases in my testing in terms of Warcraft Manor where I was able to get almost close to 200k HPS. You have to remember, you get scaled down to 440 item level. 200k HPS during these pulls felt really impactful. Now in terms of ranking Restoration Druid, you have to remember that Resto Druid or Druids provide Mark of the Wild, which is arguably one of the best party raid buffs that you can have, and I think most meta compositions when it comes to Mythicalist will want to squeeze in Mark of the Wild somewhere in there. Now you have to ask yourself also, is Resto Druid the best Druid spec when it comes to Season 3? Because you might have other competition in terms of Balanced Druid or Feral Druid, or possibly other ones depending on how tuning is going to turn out. Resto Druid provides Mark of the Wild, it provides Battle Res. In terms of some negativity, picking up Interrupt can be relatively awkward because you might have to sacrifice other things, but if you have something like a Prot Paladin or melee heavy composition when it comes to Season 3, Interrupts might not be that big of a deal, so you might not really need that healer interrupt. But taking all of these things into consideration, I'm very inclined about pushing Resto Druid in that S tier. And again, I talked about Mark of the Wild, I talked about Battle Res, I talked about the fact that in terms of carry potential, in terms of dealing with the oh crap moments, I think Resto Druid is very strong contender in terms of just carrying your group in terms of HPS. We'll have to see how big or how the healing balance is going to turn out in Season 3 in terms of, do you just want to survive, or is healer damage going to be a bigger thing? Overall, I think Resto Druid is going to be an excellent choice, especially for people who are looking to poke Mythic Plus content, because there's going to be a lot of people who poke rank 1 title. That's a thing. And I think for healers who are looking to poke rank 1 title, they might want to pick a healer that can just babysit the whole group, that can provide or meet the HPS checks relatively easily, and I think Resto Druid is going to be one of the best choices. And now let's move on to Mistweaver Monk, and I had a blast as Mistweaver Monk in Season 3 because there's a lot of good things that are happening to Mistweaver Monk, especially in that Mythic Plus content. There's been a lot of buffs, there's been a lot of quality of life improvements. Blizzard has kind of been buffing Mistweaver Monk every single week, maybe incremental buffs that will add up eventually. And I think if you want to play Mistweaver Monk, I think Season 3 might be the best season to play in terms of community perception. I think there's going to be a lot more people willing to reroll or give Mistweaver a try. When it comes to Mythic Plus content, spin to win is definitely a thing for Mistweaver Monk. You are a melee healer, or at least right now, melee build is looking to be like the strongest one in terms of pressing Phalanx Stomp, in terms of having Awakened Phalanx and pressing something like Spinning Crane Kick, and depending on how many mobs you have, it can provide a lot of damage and healing at the same time. In terms of your tier set bonus, I really like the tier set bonus. I think the fact that your 2 set bonus, for example, you can press something like Renewing Mist, that person is going to get 3 Harmony. That means that person has 50% or takes 50% extra healing from you. Casting something like Instant Cast Vivify with Vivacious Vivification means that you're going to see bars move, and that is not going to take away from that instant cast playstyle that Mistweaver has when it comes to that Phalanx Stomp build. In terms of survivability, they've definitely been looking at melee healer survivability in patch 10.2 in terms of Season 3, because for Mistweaver Monk specifically, they buffed talents like Calming Presence, they buffed things like Bounce Back, they reworked Expel Harm, and I think these are only positive things for Mistweaver Monk coming into Season 3. On top of that, as a monk, you do provide Mystic Touch, which could gain value in Season 3 because melee is looking to be more desirable in Season 3 than it did in Season 2. And in terms of ranking Mistweaver Monk, I still think Mistweaver Monk provides a decent amount of utility in terms of something like Ring of Peace, in terms of AoE stun. It still has other things in terms of Generous Pour, in terms of Close to Heart. It has things that it can provide to the party. Mistweaver Monk has utility, but it's missing those big ticket items and those of Battle Res or Bloodlust. In my opinion, if Mistweaver Monk had Battle Res, it would just complement that Mythic Plus meta a lot more, because Augmentation of Evoker will provide something like Bloodlust. So because of this, you also have to look at the fact that Mistweaver Monk does suffer from melee. It is running that Phalanx Stomp build, and if you cannot stay in melee, you can really suffer. Your healing is going to suffer and things like that. It's not like Holy Paladin, where Holy Paladin can step out of melee, he can still do a lot of healing. Mistweaver Monk running that Phalanx Stomp build can be really punished by not being in melee, and this is why I wanted that couple of yard increase when it comes to that melee of Phalanx Stomp build. I really wanted that. I asked that every single video, I included that in every single video, but Blizzard hasn't really done that. So because of this, I'm going to be placing Mistweaver Monk in A tier, because it's just missing out from that S tier spot. I still think Mistweaver Monk might have an easier time getting invited than Preservation of Evoker, because Augmentation of Evoker is looking to be like such a sure pick, and I think Mistweaver Monk could have an easier time getting invited to those Mythic Plus keys, especially, for example, if you have something like a Prot Paladin as your tank, which can provide Battle Res and can have a lot of interrupts and things like that, and you have Augmentation of Evoker to provide Bloodlust. And you might not need or care if your healer provides a Battle Res or Bloodlust. That could be a thing, and I think Mistweaver Monk could be a really decent choice here, especially if you want that Mistweaver's utility. We'll have to see how other monk specs are going to compare in that meta, Mythic Plus ranking and things like that, but overall I think if you want to play Mistweaver Monk in Season 3, I think you should, because it might be one of the best times to play a monk. In terms of rating, in terms of Mythic Plus, I think the community perception is going to be a lot better. I think there needs to be a push towards Mistweaver Monk right now, because there's not a lot of players who play Monk in general, and that kind of, like if you look at sub-creation data in a month or 2 months, Mistweaver Monk could be easily capable of doing the highest keys in the world, but there's very few people who play them, and therefore Mistweaver Monk falls down. In my opinion, Mistweaver is high A tier, close to S tier. I think there could be few things made to make Mistweaver a perfect healer, and I think there is still time for a couple of changes, but I'm just not 100% sure if Mistweaver is fully capable of going to the S tier yet. But if you want to play Mistweaver Monk, it is a very, very good choice, especially if you like being in melee. So now let's go to Holy Priest, and honestly I had a decent time when testing Holy Priest, especially since they fixed the 4-set proc chance, because before that, your tier set in terms of the procs was very, very lackluster, and that kind of put off a lot of Holy Priest. But ever since they fixed that, you're getting a lot more procs from your 4-set bonus, which meant that you can use more Holy War spells. Holy War spells are going to apply or give Renew to people. Renew is going to give you a chance of proccing 4-set bonus, and your 4-set bonus also has a mana reduction component, which meant that you could definitely save a decent amount of mana. You could use a lot more Holy Word spells. And you have to remember, Holy Priest is a very classic type of healer. You see someone take damage, you heal them, especially if you run something like Lightweaver, which I'm not sure what the best capstone build is going to be. I tried out multiple different builds, couple of builds trying to work towards a tier set bonus, couple of builds trying to work with that spot healing, things like that. So I tested out Holy Priest in multiple different ways, but I'm not sure what the best build is going to be in terms of high-end Mythic Plus content when it comes to getting the most HPS out or getting the most damage and healing at the same time. But you also have to remember, because it is a very classic style of healer, a lot of times if shit hits the fan and everyone needs healing or things like that, you will be sacrificing DPS. You can't really do a lot of healing through damage when compared to other healers or compared to your counterpart in terms of Discipline Priest. Discipline Priest is all about healing through damage, while Holy Priest is a lot different in that respect. But I have to say, Holy Priest is the best choice for anyone new who's coming into patch 10.2. I think it's a relatively easy healer to pick up and do well with. But overall, I think Holy Priest is going to suffer the most from the fact that Priest, you have 2 healing specs and you can play Discipline. Discipline is getting a rework and it's getting so much hype in patch 10.2 in terms of Season 3 that is absolutely insane. And I think because of this, Holy Priest is actually going to fall, and I'm going to place this in terms of ranking. I'm going to place this in B tier. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that Discipline Priest is getting so much hype in Season 3 in patch 10.2. At the end of the day, Holy Priest or Priest in general, you're providing PI, providing Master Spell, you can have Mind Soothe and things like that, but a lot of those things are getting nerfed in Season 3. PI is getting nerfed, Master Spell is on 2 minutes and things like that, and you don't have an interrupt. So there is going to be a lot of questions asked about Priests in general. Can we afford to lose an interrupt, and is PI big enough to lose an interrupt, or is PI big enough to bring a Priest in meta? We will also have to see how sought after Fortitude is going to be for those meta teams pushing the highest keys in the world. It'll be very interesting to see how Priest utility is going to fare in Season 3, because in Season 2 you needed to have a Priest for that Master Spell. PI is very strong in terms of using it on something like a Fire Mage. They actually made Fire Mage a lot more viable if you had PI. And Shadow Priest was the #1 choice in terms of a Priest. In Season 3, in patch 10.2, Shadow Priest is not really in a good spot, and I don't think Shadow Priest is going to be all that meta, which means that we'll be looking at Healing Priests. So in terms of Holy Priest and in terms of Discipline Priest, you have to also look at the fact that PI got nerfed, Master Spells on 2 minutes and things like that. So your utility as a Priest is reduced. Is it still going to be something that is going to warrant you a spot in that Mythic Plus meta group? We'll have to see. So overall, I actually believe that Holy Priest is going to suffer from the fact that your Discipline Priest, or you're able to reroll to Discipline Priest, and Discipline Priest is getting a rework, it's getting so much hype and things like that. People are really going to try out Discipline Priest. So overall, if you're doing high-end Mythic Plus content and a group invites a Priest or a Heal Priest, they'll probably assume that's a disc. In a similar way that you might invite something like, or Preservation Evoker has to battle with Augmentation Evoker because of multiple utilities. So because of this, Holy Priest is going to fall down. But if you're looking to do if you're just looking to do weekly keys, so if you're looking to start your healing journey for the first time in Season 3, honestly, Holy Priest is the best choice and you can still do well. But this is a meta prediction, and there's always going to be winners and losers. And now let's go to Restoration Shaman, and based on my testing, I had a decent time with Restoration Shaman. I ran multiple different builds. For the people who haven't been following changes to Resto Shaman, it went through a roller coaster of emotions when it comes to Mythic Plus, because there's been a lot of changes in terms of every single healer receiving single target buffs, which kind of meant that on top of the fact that Resurgence was nerfed in terms of the mana gains that you were getting, a lot of people who were testing Resto Shaman initially in 10.2 were running builds where you did not use Chain Heal, because Chain Heal was, you would run out of mana, it wasn't as impactful as something like single target heals on top of your tier set. So there were multiple reasons to run builds that would not cast Chain Heal at all. In the last couple of weeks, Blizzard kind of done a change of heart in terms of buffing Chain Heal in terms of 20% in terms of effectiveness and reducing the mana cost of Chain Heal. So I ran multiple different builds again in Mythic Plus in terms of Warcraft mana, and I genuinely believe you could have multiple builds as Resto Shaman when it comes to Season 3, depending on which builds you prefer. Initially, let's say for example, right now on live servers in patch 10.17, a lot of Resto Shamans are running the no Chain Heal build when it comes to that high-end Mythic Plus content. They're not really casting Chain Heal and things like that, but in patch 10.2, they did nerf Ancestral Awakening, which honestly felt bad if you're looking for that no Chain Heal build. I'll have to see how that's going to work out in the future and things like that. But for a 2-point talent that got nerfed, I don't think that was really warranted. So I'm not 100% sure what the best build is going to be for Resto Shamans when it comes to Mythic Plus content. Maybe it'll be some sort of hybrid or something along those lines. I personally ran a build where I was never casting Chain Heal build. I was running a build where I was casting Chain Heal and things like that. You can still have mana issues with Chain Heal depending on how you use it, but I think with the recent buffs or reduction to mana cost of Chain Heal, it definitely has helped a little bit. I still think Resto Shaman has a good amount of utility. You have Bloodlust, you have Stone Totem, you have Disrupt with Thunderstorm depending on how you use it, you have Poison Cleansing Totem, you have the best healer Interrupt in terms of the range and cooldown. There's a lot of good things about Resto Shaman in terms of utility, but in order to rank Resto Shaman, I'm going to be placing it in B tier, somewhere close to Holy Priest, mainly because of the fact that the tier set bonus is somewhat underwhelming. I've been testing the tier set bonus for a decently long time, and the 2 set bonus, for example, in raid situations is very decent. I get a decent amount of value from the 2 set bonus alone when it comes to raiding situations. When it comes to Mythic Plus, I was getting only a couple of percent, and I was really disappointed about that. I don't really like the tier set bonus for Resto Shaman, and believe it or not, a tier set bonus can make or break a class. And I think we're having a somewhat similar situation that happened in Season 2, where the tier set bonus wasn't really all that amazing, and it just took multiple different iterations or buffs to make the tier set more viable, more interesting, and more usable. And I think, in my predictions, I think the exact same thing is going to happen in Season 3. I think Blizzard is going to look at the tier set. I think they're going to buff it. I was kind of hoping for a rework because I think you could use a rework in terms of making it more fun to play, in terms of adding additional value, because I think it's relatively hard to balance a tier set in raids and Mythic Plus, or depending on which build you run, because there's multiple different builds that you can use as Resto Shaman. I don't know if they're going to rework the tier set, but if they're going to buff the tier set a lot more in the future, I think Resto Shaman could easily go back to the A tier because the utility is there and things like that. You can still do good damage, you can still have good healing and things like that. But because of the tier set and uncertainty around the tier set, I'm relatively reluctant about placing Resto Shaman a little bit higher. Surprise, surprise, while editing this video, Blizzard decided to buff Restoration Shamans, and that includes the tier set. If you look at the amount of changes that happened to the tier set over the last couple of weeks, it's kind of overwhelming, because that's exactly what's happening. What I said at the start of the video in terms of Restoration Shaman is that they didn't know how to tune the tier set, and they're buffing it almost every single week, trying to make up for the lack of power when it comes to certain content. And this is buffs. These are buffs to Restoration Shaman. They're going to make Resto Shaman stronger in all forms of content. And check out the summary of the video for the updated thoughts or closing opinions. And now let's go to Discipline Priest. And honestly, this is going to be one of the hardest healers for me to rank, because I'm still very unsold about Discipline Priest and where to put it, because it's received the biggest rework coming into patch 10.2, coming into Season 3. It's received multiple different changes in terms of talents, or abilities being outright deleted, abilities being made into passive or passively merged together. For example, the setup time for Discipline Priest when it comes to Mythic Plus content is a lot less stressful, because, for example, you can press Mind Blast and that's going to proc Schism. You can press Shadow Fiend or Mindbender and that's going to apply Shadow Covenant. So your setup time is reduced in terms of healing through damage, but you're also losing your previous tier set. And this is probably a comment that I received the most when it comes to Discipline Priest, is that people are really unhappy about losing instant cast Radiance. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I definitely would want instant cast Radiance to come back, but I don't think it's a deal breaker because your setup time is reduced because you have less buttons to press. There's also a lot more emphasis on something like Smite because of things like your tier set bonus, and a lot of people are still unsold about how fun it is. I had a lot of fun as Discipline Priest, testing it in patch 10.2, testing on PTU, running Warcraft mana and things like that. I had a lot of fun. I think the simplicity is appealing to me, but I'm also going through that honeymoon stage because this does feel like a new class. Where should I place Discipline Priest when it comes to high Mythic Plus meta? I'm very uncertain where to place it. I think at the very least Discipline Priest could be in high A tier because it provides a lot of damage. It's arguably the best DPS healer, but Blizzard has definitely noticed that, and over the last couple of weeks Blizzard has been tuning down Discipline Priest damage. And the most recent change that happened right now that you can see on the screen here, this happened while I was editing the video. This change can actually be viewed as an overall HPS buff when it comes to raid situations, But in Mythic Plus, this will be viewed as a nerf, and a pretty significant nerf in terms of your overall damage as Disc, who's doing or focusing on Mythic Plus content. On top of that, you saw me testing in terms of the footage, in terms of Warcraft's mana, testing talents like Ultimate Penitence, which is the new talent that came about in 10.2. I'm still very unsold about the fact if this talent is going to be usable in Mythic Plus, but it was fun to test. Still unsold about whether people are going to be using it in high-end Mythic Plus content. In terms of priest utility, we talked about it in Holy Priest section. In Season 2, you absolutely needed a priest because PI and Master Spell were so strong. They really kind of complemented the God comp. Now in Season 3, Shadow Priest is not looking all that good, so you might be looking at including a priest in terms of Healing Priest. And Discipline Priest is probably going to be your #1 option when it comes to creating that high-end Mythic Plus meta. But at the end of the day, I'm not sold on the priest utility completely. I'm not sure if PI alone is going to invite you to that highest keys in the world. We'll have to see, because they're kind of changing Discipline Priest every single week, because they're trying, it's a new class almost to some extent. The rework is pretty big. But because of the fact, and this is something that I'm going to change Discipline Priest here, I'm going to be placing it in S tier. And that is mainly because it's getting reworked, it's getting so much hype. There's going to be so many people that are going to be trying out Discipline Priest, and I think Discipline Priest is going to be, it's going to be flooded in terms of rankings. I still think you're going to be able to do really high keys as Discipline Priest, especially in an organized content where you can make use of your PI. I think that's a big deal. Discipline Priest still has, there's been more emphasis on continuous healing with buffs to something like Penance and things like that. So overall, I'm placing Discipline in S tier purely for the fact that hype is going to carry it. Do I truly believe Discipline Priest is S tier? I probably would place it somewhere closer to A tier because of the nerfs to utility. So right now, I'm going to be placing Discipline Priest in S tier, but I'm very, very unsold about this. I would probably be more closer towards A tier, but the hype is gonna carry Discipline to S tier when it comes to Season 3, at least in my opinion. Welcome to the summary of my video, and it's relatively scuffed because I was about to release my video, I edited it and everything else, and then Blizzard decided to release further healing tuning, which it's not going to change the tier list all that much, but I want to talk about the direction in which Blizzard is heading. I want to talk about the changes. I'm going to start off with Holy Paladin in this case, and in terms of the class changes that were released very recently, in terms of tuning, healing reduced by 8% instead of 5%, so your overall healing is going to be less as Holy Paladin. Holy Prism heal increased by 40%, which makes sense because Holy Prism felt like a really lackluster button, especially when it comes to that Mythic Plus content, because you're used to Holy Prism doing a lot because of the previous tier set. And Blessing of Sacrifice now splits 20% of all damage instead of 30%. So how is that going to change my ranking? It's not really going to change my ranking. I'm still going to be placing Holy Paladin in S tier just because purely Holy Paladin feels like a class that was designed for Mythic Plus content. The design of this class just fits the damage and healing patterns that you see in Mythic Plus content. You still have strong utility, your survivability is still strong, even though Blizzard is trying to nerf all of this every single week. If I were to make predictions in like 1 month or 2 month time, I genuinely would believe that it's probably safer to play something like a Mistweaver Monk, because Mistweaver Monk is getting buffs every single week, while Holy Paladin is getting nerfs every single week in terms of that melee healer meta. I definitely feel Blizzard is trying to put a different focus in terms of which healer they want to kind of bring up. And it makes sense because Mistweaver hasn't been meta for a long time. I still believe Holy Paladin is going to be strong purely given the fact that they feel like they're designed for Mythic Plus. So what does Blizzard do? How can you make a class that is designed for Mythic Plus feel not mandatory in that high-end Mythic Plus content? I would be relatively scared to think that Blizzard is going to continue with this trend in terms of nerfing Holy Paladin until no one wants to play Holy Paladin because they don't know what makes Holy Paladin strong. And in terms of nerfing, if they actually focus on the right things in terms of nerfing Holy Paladin's strength in Mythic Plus, that would kind of go against the redesign that they chose in patch 10.15. So Blizzard is kind of stuck here, but the intention here is very, very clear. Blizzard does not want Holy Paladin to be the only one healer that people are going to be picking in high-end Mythic Plus content, and I think they're going to achieve that at some point. Right now, I still think Holy Paladin is going to be strong purely because it just has buttons for almost every single situation. The redesign was very strong when it comes to Mythic Plus content, and I don't think that's going to change just yet, but the intention is very scary for anyone who's maining Holy Paladin, because who's to say that this nerf is the last nerf? Now let's move on to Discipline Priest in terms of the latest changes that happened to them. Now, Sins of the Many increased damage by 20%, used to be 40%, and Atonement heals for 40% of damage done was 35%. This change could be viewed as a HBS buff to Discipline Priest and raid content, but it'll definitely be viewed as an overall nerf to Discipline Priest approaching Mythic Plus. This is something that Blizzard has been battling for the last couple of weeks in terms of tuning down Discipline Priest damage, because for the longest time, this priest was by far the best DPS healer. So how does this change my ranking for Discipline Priest? I still believe that the hype for Disc is going to be real. A lot of people are going to re-roll to Disc or try out Discipline because it's going to be simplified. Your setup times are going to be... There's going to be less setup times. You're still missing that instant cast power with Radiance, which is going to be... It's going to be sorely missed, but I think Disc is going to be a lot more approachable to a lot more players, and I think there's going to be a bigger player base when it comes to Disc pushing keys, and because of that, I think the hype is going to carry Disc in that S tier. Do I think it deserves that S tier based on the changes that happen right now in terms of damage nerfs, in terms of utility nerfs? No. I think Discipline would actually be somewhere in terms of high A tier, because you have to remember, Power Infusion has been nerfed, Master Spell has been nerfed in terms of being 2 minutes. You have to look at things like Mind Suit. You might have a composition which will include a rogue spec, which will bring something like Shadow Concealment. You also have to look at the fact that Shadow Priest did get a buff, but he might not make it into that meta composition, and you'll have to ask yourself, do meta groups need that priest utility? And if they do, if Power Infusion is going to be something that might carry Discipline Priest, it could very much be S tier. I don't think it deserves that S tier right now, but because of the hype, because of how approachable Discipline Priest is going to be after the rework, and given the fact that people are going to flock to Discipline, they're going to play more Discipline Priest, I think Blizzard is still going to keep their focus on this spec because it is reworked, and if it's not doing well, my prediction would be that they're going to pay attention and they might buff Discipline Priest if it's underperforming because of the fact that it is one of the classes that's being reworked. So for me, Discipline is going to be hyped into S tier. I don't think it deserves the S tier, but I think it's going to be hyped in there, and because of the focus that Blizzard is paying to Discipline Priest, I think it's still going to be a very, very solid healer. And now we're going to look at two healers because I want to compare them in my rankings. So first of all, Holy Priest fixed an issue that caused Holy War Sanctified to hit 6 targets instead of 5. Symbol of Hope now reduces the cooldown of major defenses by 30 seconds, used to be 40 seconds, and your 4-set bonus, the proc chance, has been reduced by 10%. Overall, these seem to be like nerfs more aimed at raiding situations, but there's still nerfs to Holy Priest, which honestly kind of doesn't really make sense. And in terms of Restoration Shaman, all healing has been increased by 3%, and surprise, surprise, they're buffing the tier set again. That is not a, like, I honestly believe that they're going to be going through multiple iterations of the tier set, because Resto Shaman tier set was just so lackluster in, depending on which build you're running, depending on which content you're running, and we're kind of seeing the same thing that we saw in Season 2. Shaman tier set is going through multiple different iterations until it actually reaches a point where it's going to be usable and Shamans are going to feel a little bit better to play. Let's go to my ranking and how that's going to impact Mythic Plus meta. So given the fact that Holy Priest is getting a nerf and Resto Shaman is getting a buff, I definitely would swap them in this position. I genuinely believe that Resto Shaman will have to test the changes. I kind of predicted the fact that Resto Shaman is going to get multiple changes in terms of the tier set, because the tier set was very weirdly tuned depending on which content you're doing, depending on which build you're running. I think Resto Shaman could easily climb to that A tier. I think you could find a build that works well for Resto Shamans. They still provide good utility, they still provide good damage and things like that. But I don't think they feel as good as something like Preservation of Evoker or Mistweaver Monk right now. So I still would place it in high B tier. I still think you can do really high keys as Resto Shaman. You can make Resto Shaman work. I genuinely believe there's going to be more changes to Resto Shaman happening. So if you're someone who's maining Resto Shaman, I still think you can be very hopeful. The only downside of Resto Shaman changes is that they're coming very late. Initially, Resto Shaman was in a pretty poor state when you look at the start of 10.2 PTR, and they got significantly better over the time because Blizzard has been trying to look at Resto Shamans, but it's coming a little bit late, and all these tier lists are going to be placing Resto Shaman in low tiers and things like that. I think Resto Shaman is definitely closer to A tier than B tier, but I still don't think that it feels as impactful as these healers here. So I'm going to be placing Resto Shaman still in B tier, but I genuinely believe they're going to be climbed. And Holy Priest, again, the changes or the nerfs are a little bit unwarranted in my opinion, and I think Holy Priest is just going to fall purely because of the fact that Discipline Priests exist. Most of the people who are doing high Mythic Plus keys, when they're going to invite a priest, they're going to be, okay, this priest is going to be a discipline. It's not going to be holy. And that just genuinely happens with classes that can play multiple specs that are very, very strong. The same thing happens with Preservation of Evoker in terms of battling for Augmentation of Evoker, or with Augmentation of Evoker for that Mythic plus meta spot. So the same thing is happening to Holy Priest, and that's why I'm placing Holy Priest a little bit lower right now. And in terms of Mistweaver changes, there's been more buffs. Almost every single week you're receiving buffs. This seems like the golden child has fallen onto Mistweaver Monk because they want Mistweaver to be meta, which is honestly a refreshing change because Mistweaver hasn't been perceived as strong for a very long time. So Blackout Kick damage increase, Tiger Palm damage increase, Spinning Crane Kick damage increase, Feline Stomp healing a damage increase by further 150%. It used to be increased by 100% last time or last week. Ancient Teaching of Monitoring may now stack up to 4 times. Essence Font now heals 5 targets instead of 6, but Essence Font healing is increased by 40%, which basically means here that this may help Feline Stomp's initial heal feel more impactful. These are basically buffs, primarily in my opinion, for Mistweaver Monk that's coming or doing Mythic Plus content, specifically Ancient Teachings build with Feline Stomp build, and this is something that Mistweaver Monks run in that high-end Mythic Plus content. How is that going to change my ranking? I'm still going to be placing Mistweaver Monks in A tier just because I feel they're missing some of those utility items in terms of having a Battle Res, a Bloodlust. I generally believe Battle Res would be better because, again, Augmentation Evoker is looking to be like a sure pick when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus content, so having a Battle Res is going to be a bit more impactful, and I would have liked that melee range increase. That's something that I've been asking for a long time, because if you cannot be in melee with that Feline Stomp build, with that Ancient Teachings build, you're going to pay the price. Unlike something like Holy Paladin, who can really step out of melee without having too much of a penalty. So Mistweaver still has some things that prevents it from going to S tier. So if I were to try to predict what's going to happen in a month, I definitely think the focus has shifted. There's been nerfs, or specifically for melee healer meta, because there's been nerfs to Holy Paladin every single week, and there's been buffs to Mistweaver Monk almost every single week, which at some point Mistweaver Monk could overtake Holy Paladin if this trend continues. If this is going to happen every single week until Blizzard feels that these healers are relatively close, which could happen, I think Mistweaver Monk might actually be a safer pick than something like Holy Paladin. Again, how many people are going to re-roll to Mistweaver Monk to push that Mythic Plus content or push that raiding content and things like that? I feel there's going to be people who are going to be re-rolling, but Monk in general has the least played, or the community is relatively small. And when you try to predict that sub-creation data, and sub-creation is all about healer popularity, I'm not sure if the shift is going to be big enough to really bring Mistweaver to that S tier just yet. But I think if you're Mistweaver Monk, you're loving the changes that are happening. You're loving the focus that Blizzard is placing on Mistweaver Monks, because I generally believe this is going to be the season to Mistweaver Monk. I could place Mistweaver Monk a little bit higher, but I still think it misses some of that utility and some of that quality of life improvements when it comes to that melee build, or when it comes to that Feline Stomp build in Mythic Plus content. And this kind of concludes all the healer changes that happened in very recently, but I still want to talk about Preservation Evoker, because in my opinion, people are sleeping for Preservation Evoker in terms of throughput. I would easily place Preservation Evoker in S tier based on how much damage they can provide, based on how much healing they can provide. They have a 2-set bonus that is absolutely powerhouse in terms of the amount of essence bursts you get, and you can spend those essence bursts in multiple different ways. The fact that you have range limitations, but maybe there's going to be a more heavy emphasis on melee, which means that you're going to be able to heal, or it's going to be less awkward to heal, it's going to be less awkward to hit your dream breaths and things like that. It's only a good thing. But the only reason I'm not placing Preservation Evoker in this S tier is because Augmentation exists. Augmentation is looking to be like a sure pick in that high-end Mythic Plus content, and you don't really want to duplicate utilities, especially because Mythic Plus only consists of 5 players. And it's really sad for me to say that, because Preservation would really, it's really sad to see. The same kind of thing is happening with Holy Priest in terms of being overshadowed by Discipline Priest. Preservation is being overshadowed by Augmentation. And again, if you want to play Preservation Evoker, Preservation is a great healer. It's getting carried by that 2-set bonus. It's still providing, the numbers are really good. The numbers are so good that there are people that are calling for nerfs for Preservation Evoker. That is the state, or that is the current state of the throughput that Preservation Evoker can provide. But at the end of the day, when it comes to that high Mythic Plus meta, you have to consider the group composition, and Augmentation Evoker is just in such a good state right now that I just don't see Augmentation Evoker not being included in the highest keys in the world. And lastly, Restoration Druid. I'm going to keep Restoration Druid in S tier. I know that a lot of people are not going to agree with this. I generally believe people are sleeping on Restoration Druid output right now, especially when it comes to HPS. we have to look at the overall healer balance, and you definitely see that there is a HPS tax that is being applied to healers that provide utility and things like that, or more utility. But Resto Druid is one of those healers that can really pump HPS. I genuinely believe that there are some posts that I was doing in my testing that I could not do with other healers. The fact that your Tree of Life, Scenarios Guidance, spawning Grove Guardians, those Grove Guardians interact with your tier set bonus. Your spot healing feels a lot more impactful with Grove Guardians. I know Grove Guardian healing is relatively awkward in terms of which targets they're picking and things like that, but in 5-man content, a lot of the times it doesn't really matter that much if you have 3 Grove Guardians at the same time and they're all pumping nourishes that are proccing with 2-set bonus. The amount of healing that you can provide as Resto Druid is actually insane. If we think that Season 3 is going to be more about keeping the party alive and less about healer damage, which a lot of the times people overvalue healer damage by a significant amount. If you look at Season 2, it was more about keeping the party alive than actually providing DPS. Don't get me wrong, healer damage is still important. You still want to provide as much damage as possible when timing the highest keys in the world. But a lot of the times, if there's going to be huge healing checks, and if the emphasis is going to be more about keeping the party alive, Resto Druid is arguably one of the best contenders here. On top of that, it provides Mark of the Wild and has a battle res. You have a battle res which is going to complement really well with something like Augmentation Evoker, which is looking to be like a really strong pick in high-end Mythic Plus content. I think people are really sleeping on Resto Druid. I'm not 100% sold or sure about what the DPS of Resto Druid is going to be like. And I think if the composition might consist of something like Protection Paladin, you might not need an interrupt from Resto Druid, so Resto Druid can spec out of interrupt and go into something like extra survivability. If you're someone who's looking to pug high-end Mythic Plus content, and you're not sure if people are going to be using the defensives properly, or you just want to carry the group in terms of keeping them alive, or if you have anxiety about meeting high healing checks, Resto Druid is going to solve a lot of those problems because of the throughput that it provides depending on which build you run. So don't sleep on Resto Druid. We'll have to see in terms of what other Druid specs are going to be powerful in terms of providing that Mark of the Wild, because I genuinely believe a lot of the meta groups will want to have Mark of the Wild because it is arguably the strongest party or raid buff you can have. This is my overall ranking for healers when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus content. I know this video was overall very long, but that is also to do with the fact that Blizzard kind of threw a wrench in terms of additional healer tuning. I think this ranking will change in a month or a couple of weeks if Blizzard continues with a trend that they kind of set in terms of nerfing Holy Paladin, in terms of buffing Mistweaver Monk, in terms of buffing Resto Shaman tier set and things like that. I think Resto Shaman could climb. I think Mistweaver Monk could climb. I think Holy Paladin could drop. I think that could easily happen. In terms of safe healers to pick, honestly, I don't know what a safe healer is going to be when it comes to Season 3 in terms of patch 10.2, because Blizzard definitely wants to have a more balanced approach. If you just watched this video, or if you only saw the end of the video, my overall suggestion for you is that healer balance is looking to be a lot better in Season 3 than it was in Season 2. I think there's going to be a lot more competition when it comes to that high Mythic Plus content. I think there's going to be a lot more competition in terms of which healer to invite in your group, and I think Blizzard wants that. So play whichever healer you find the most fun, because that is going to be the best value for your subscription. I think Season 3 is going to be a lot better in healer balance. Let me know how you think about this video. I apologize for the length of the video. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out, and I'll see you in my next guide.